Hello, you're listening to Politics Uncensored with me, Ali Milani.
And me, Zoe Grunewald.
Coming up on the show, Sakir Starmer's pledge to recognise the state of Palestine by September 2025 unless Israel meets specific conditions. Plus, we'll take a closer look at Reform UK leader Nigel Farage's newly unveiled plans to tackle crime in the UK. A £17 billion strategy to halve crime within 5 years.
As always, you can find us at Politics Uncensored UK on social media. All that and more coming up later in the programme.
But first, it's the Week Unwrapped. And this story has sent certain sections of particularly the online right into absolute meltdown, as it does every year, as the most popular boys and girls names for 2024 have been revealed. So this is the most popular names for children born in England and Wales in the calendar year 2024. They've been released with Athena and Yahya making it into the top 100 for the first time. But what has sent people over the edge, and Rupert, I'm thinking of you, mate, because I know how hard this has been on you, is that the name Mohammed tops the rankings again amongst boy names alongside those. Actually, you know what might be fun, Zoe? Before we get into the analysis, do you want to guess? Mohammed and Olivia are the two most popular boys and girls names. Have you seen this or no?
Yes.
Okay, so you know. Okay, so I'll just say it. It's alongside other names like Noah, Oliver, Arthur, and Leo for boys, and Amelia, Lily, Isla, and Ivy for girls. But obviously, Mohammed being the leading, the most popular name by quite some distance, actually, is one that sent a lot of people into utter meltdown, has ruined their Thursdays and probably Fridays, Saturdays, and Sundays as well. Have you seen some of the either real or faux outrage online?
Well, I have a vague recollection of this happening before. I think Mohammed was also England's most popular boy's baby name last year. The other thing is there are several different spellings of Mohammed. There is, right? Yeah. Are they all?
I think so. They're all included. So MOs are included. Because some people go MOH, and then some people do MU and MA at the end. So I think they're all included. I would assume so.
And
otherwise,
if I had to think like a racist, it's like
if I had to,
I'm going to try and channel it. Okay. It's because they think that this is evidence that Mohammeds are taking over the UK. So there are now going to be more Mohammeds than white babies.
Do you want me to break some news for you? It's not just that that's happening. Muslims are going into hospitals, and as people are naming their kids at like gunpoint when making them call people. So
it's
there's loads
Sharia law, right?
Sharon's law, we didn't want to admit this, but I have authorization from the Muslim WhatsApp group to let the Great British people know that we've been doing this for some years now. And so there are lots of little white Mohammeds running around.
How many of these Mohammeds are concentrated in Birmingham? Because as we know, Birmingham is
the Islamic State of Birmingham.
The Islamic State of Birmingham.
Yeah. There's a few. Okay, we're being silly. Can I just give you the actual reason why this is the case? So, it's because this, in terms of popularity, it's about concentration, right? So it's not that Mohammed makes up more names than all the other boys' names. It's just the most common name because Muslims, as a proportion, tend to, in concentration, name their kids Mohammed more than others. That's one. The second one is also the fact that in quite a lot of cultures, Bangladeshi cultures for one, people will formally name their child Mohammed, and their second name will actually be the name that they use day to day. So I have friends whose names are, for example, Mohammed Rayhan.
Right.
We've always known him as Rayhan, but they place the Prophet's name first formally as a sort of sign of respect and reverence for the Prophet. So they're not actually called Mohammed, but legally that's the case. So these are some of the actual reasons why it might be the case. And also what we must bear in mind as well is there are white British Muslims out there who will be calling their kids Mohammed and are named Mohammed. Only 20% of Muslims are Arabs, for example, which is where Islam kind of originated in the Middle East. So there is a huge proportion of white Muslims as well. But obviously what we're seeing here is the racist meltdown of people who are kind of exposing themselves a little bit by A, not understanding what this data means, B, not understanding so white people can be named Mohammed as well, and C, think this is some sort of takeover of
yeah, it feeds into the great replacement theory narrative that we've been
also, if it's
fed.
Can I just say, if it's a great replacement, that surely Muslims are also having girls, and I don't remember the last time I met a Muslim Olivia.
And Olivia's the top for
girls. Well, let me name you the top girls one: Olivia, Amelia, Lily, Isla, Ivy, Florence, Freya, Poppy, Ava, and Elsie. Not a single Muslim name there.
No, need to fix that. Next year.
It's not like Muslims are also, when the baby is born, you know when you play Sims and you get to choose as baby is born, you go into the settings and you go, I only want a boy. That's also not happening.
Right, okay. So you're basically saying that there's no need for a racist meltdown.
There isn't, but I can understand how these people like Rupert Lowe who don't have 2 IQ points to rub together will be on social media having a meltdown, and actually, if we're honest, using this as a way to stoke further anger around the country because it fits his political objective. But the reality is there are reasons why this is the case, but also, even if Mohammed was the most common popular name, so what? What's your beef?
Yeah, it's a good name.
Better than Rupert.
Yeah. Well, are you a bear?
I don't know why I'm obsessed with him, by the way. It's because he won't reply to me on Twitter. It's because every time I have a pop, he doesn't reply, and it makes me feel small.
Fair enough.
Rupert, I just want your attention. We'll move on to the next story. UK Technology Secretary Peter Kyle has sparked a fierce controversy. But, we never do the Week Unwrapped, and it's just like puppies have been found in London running. Do you know, it's always so depressing.
They probably have, but it's just not newsworthy.
It's true. Okay.
We can talk about that next week if you want. Back to Peter.
This is why you lead in the week. Peter Kyle has sparked a fierce controversy by accusing Nigel Farage, the Reform UK leader, of effectively siding with predatory abusers like Jimmy Savile, due to Farage's pledge to repeal the recently enacted Online Safety Act. Farage fired back, denouncing the comments as disgusting and demanding a retraction, while the minister refused to apologise, insisting those opposing the law on the side of predators. The Online Safety Act has led to an extra 5 million age verification checks per day on pornographic sites, and users have responded with a surge of VPN uses, Proton. I thought we were advertising VPN. Proton VPN alone is up by 1,800% growth in UK downloads. So this has been a legitimately big conversation. There's been criticisms from the right and the left of the online safety bill. What's your take on it from what you've seen?
I want to address these
Should we do
comments.
Peter Kyle first?
I want to address these comments first because I'm once again asking, with my cap in my hand, for politicians to stop weaponising child sex abuse for political points scoring. It does my head in. It does victims no favours when politicians use child sex abuse as a gotcha on their opponents. Now,
and it's not gone down well, by the way.
I think the Online Safety Bill is an important piece of legislation. I think it's about a decade too late. Already we can see that there are ways to circumvent some of the things going on. But I think it's vitally important we keep kids safe online. A good technology secretary should be able to defend that piece of legislation robustly without invoking Jimmy Savile, right? It's just a slur. It does no favours. It's, you can criticise Nigel Farage's take on this till the cows come home. You do not need to bring up Jimmy Savile. And what is particularly irritating about this comparison, so Peter Kyle said, make no mistake about it, if people like Jimmy Savile were alive today, he'd be perpetrating his crimes online. And Nigel Farage is saying that he's on their side. No, he wouldn't, because the whole point about Jimmy Savile is he worked at the BBC and he had unfettered access to children. It was nothing to do with the online space. The whole disgust and outrage about Jimmy Savile was the fact that he had unfettered access to children, vulnerable young people, all the time. He didn't need to go online. You can make the point about paedophiles online without having to draw comparisons to one of the worst sex offenders in modern British, history.
Yeah, and as you point out, by the way, doing it inaccurately. And apparently this didn't even come from Peter Kyle just making a mistake in the moment. This was a number 10 briefing. Was it?
Well, so I hear. Apparently, it was all a plan. Let's compare Nigel Farage to, Jimmy Savile. I mean, but I don't want to defend Nigel Farage, and I hate that that's what I'm doing right now, because I will never defend that man. But
Peter, look what you've done to Zoe, man. You're making her, you're putting her in a very uncomfortable position.
You
know what surprises me? If it has come from number 10, surely, because number 10 were on the receiving end of some Jimmy Savile slurs, weren't they?
Stop! Can everyone stop bringing up Jimmy Savile? Seriously, yes, exactly. Boris Johnson used to bring up Jimmy Savile.
Yeah, I couldn't remember where it was. Yeah,
to slur Keir Starmer, because when Keir Starmer was Director for Public Prosecutions, that was around the time that Jimmy Savile was doing the unspeakable, disgusting things he was doing. I just think politicians need to take child sex abuse much more seriously. This isn't the way to do it.
There is, I mean, you've put it far more eloquently than I could have, but there is a trend of using these really disgusting crimes, whether it's child sex abuse or sexual abuse and violence against women, for political purposes now. It's just open season. Yeah. People are very happy, whether it's on the right, left, wherever.
We're living in a time where politics is only conducted through making people furious.
Yeah.
And what makes people more furious than rapists and paedophiles?
Yeah.
But the problem is we also have an epidemic of violence against women and violence against children, which politicians basically otherwise ignore. So when you're just using it to make political points, it's really cheap. But to go back to the substance of the bill, as I said, it's about a decade too late. Unfortunately, with all these things, there are ways to circumvent it. That being said, I absolutely agree that tech providers need to have obligations to keep especially young people safe online and flag harmful and harmful content and misinformation. Obviously they do. Why do newspaper proprietors and TV broadcast channels have to abide by regulations, yet Elon Musk, the richest man in the world, can sit over on his computer every night and just watch misinformation be pumped out and have real world consequences, like for example the riots in Southport last year?
Yeah, and so I guess that part of the question part of the criticism that I've seen about this that does worry me is, I mean, I don't know if I'm just skeptical and naturally averse to these companies and authority and things like that, but there's a discomfort with uploading your passport or your driver's license or whatever, your ID, onto some website, not knowing where it could go when they'd geotag you and things like that. So I think that's part of the people's concern.
And I understand that.
It's the security around that. That doesn't mean the bill isn't.
All of this is far too late. We now have tech billionaires who are far more powerful than they should have been allowed to be because politicians were not brave enough.
Yeah. Yeah. And well, from one story in which child sexual abuse was used to going back to a story that we have spoken about quite a few times on the show. 5 survivors of the Rotherham grooming gangs have come forward to claim that they were sexually abused, not only by criminal perpetrators, but also by serving police officers from South Yorkshire Police Force during the same period. 3 former police officers have since been arrested as part of the Independent Office for Police Conduct, the IOPC. The survivors say they have no faith in the force conducting its own inquiries, given its past complicity and previous systematic failures in protecting children. Zoe, this is one of those stories that just gets more horrific and more shocking. And when I first saw the story, I just thought, there's how much further could we go? But it's also one that the people who were... the politicians who are, in my view, were using these kinds of stories, both Rotherham and Jimmy Savile, as you previously said, for political purposes. I haven't seen them shouting about too much, but this is a pretty horrific story to break.
It is, and unfortunately, and we have to say, obviously, this is all alleged.
Yeah.
But I mean, it's not surprising when you hear the accounts of the victims of the grooming gangs, absolutely harrowing accounts of sexual violence, slavery, all the worst things that you can imagine happening to vulnerable young girls. They were let down at every stage by people who were supposed to take care of them, from health workers to social workers to schools to police force. But knowing that there were policemen or, that would have actively taken advantage of these girls and continued to sexually abuse them, it's absolutely appalling. I mean, there's not really much more to say about that than just to conclude that there is such a culture of misogyny evident throughout the police. I mean, we talk a lot about it in the Met Police, but South Yorkshire Police has its history of scandal, as we know. From Hillsborough to the miners' strike, to its handling of the Rotherham child abuse scandal, you have to wonder if, there's going to be a national inquiry into grooming gangs. Maybe there should be another inquiry into whether South Yorkshire Police is fit for purpose. And indeed, any of these police forces are fit for purpose when it deals with dealing like this. Because clearly, what you have are people in huge positions of power who think that they can take advantage of young girls at a time when they are at their absolute most vulnerable.
Yeah, so let me just read a part of this story. The 30 witness accounts seen by the BBC detail some shocking allegations. So years of abuse from serving police officers from the mid-90s to the early 2000s at the same time as being exploited by Rotherham grooming gangs. Most alleged victims were in their teens, but some were as young as 11. One woman says as a child she would hear a police officer having sex with girls in exchange for drugs and money. Another woman says as a child she witnessed a police officer supplying illegal Class A drugs to a grooming gang. 3 women describes being beaten up by officers as children. One says this happened in a police cell. So I do wonder, given the severity and the scale of what we're talking and seeing from these stories, whether it's time. Yes, I have been calling for much longer than it was actually called for a national inquiry into grooming gangs, but also a national inquiry into the state of sexual exploitation, sexual violence against women, and whether our judicial forces, our police forces are fit to deal with that. Because it's this story, but how many times on the show have we discussed things within this sort of area, and it just doesn't seem like things are moving.
And you're absolutely right to point out that there has been so much anger about grooming gangs, particularly, how the ethnicity of some of the perpetrators was played down or minimized by certain by police forces or by politicians during the time because they were worried about tensions. I mean, that was uncovered in the Professor J report. But this is another layer. If we're talking about a police force, this is a whole nother layer of abuse. And this does really underline the point that you and I have been making, which is that, yes, race was a part of this, a part of the grooming gangs issue, and we need to be upfront and honest about that. But what is really at the core of this is that men will rape and abuse women. Men from all backgrounds, ethnicities, colours will rape and abuse women.
Without accountability.
And when you put men in positions of power with unfettered access to victims, these things happen time and time again. The common denominator is men.
And the girls and the women have failed pretty consistently at every level.
Exactly.
So from the sort of support that they would get as children to the police force, to the judicial system, the courts and the judges and the lawyers, all the way through. So we are gonna, as we have been, continue to talk about this story and hopefully see some progress, but none has been seen. Certainly in the at least a year that means that we've been talking about this kind of story. Coming up, we're going to be moving on and talking about the escalating conflict in Gaza and particularly Labour's response, including Sir Keir Starmer's pledge to recognise the state of Palestine by September 2025. But it came with caveats. We'll talk about that and more next on Politics Uncensored. You're listening to Politics Uncensored with me, Ali Milani.
And me, Zoe Grunewald. Keir Starmer has announced this week that the UK will recognise the state of Palestine at the UN General Assembly in September, unless Israel moves to ease the humanitarian crisis in Gaza, stop West Bank occupation and recommit to a two-state solution. Well, the decision has triggered both praise and backlash. Supporters call it a necessary moral stand, while critics warn it could reward Hamas and strain UK-Israel relations. And other critics on the left suggest that the formal recognition of the state of Palestine should not come with caveats. So can this move serve as meaningful diplomatic pressure, or will it risk further destabilising an already volatile situation? Ali, I think everybody, I don't think, I haven't seen anyone who was particularly pleased by any of this, actually, on both the left and the right. For me, the issue is and the issue is very, very innate in the wording, right? How can you recognise the sovereignty, the inalienable right of the Palestinians to self-determine only if Israel do something?
Yeah.
Like, is that not just a contradiction in terms?
But you know what's crazy about it is so first of all, Keir Starmer, in his statement on, I think, the July 24th, said the phrase that a Palestinian state is the inalienable right of the Palestinian people.
Yeah.
Then yesterday, he says, was it yesterday or the day before? The day before yesterday, I think. He says that the UK will recognise Palestine ahead of the UN conference in September unless Israel agree to a ceasefire, stop settlement expansions, that sort of stuff. Now, there's a number of problems with that. One, from a moral perspective, from an ethical perspective, if you believe that something is someone's inalienable right, it then can't come with caveat. That's not how the term inalienable works. So that's one, and he's the one who used that term. Second of all, a people's right to self-determination and self-governance cannot be determined by their next-door neighbours anywhere in the world.
No.
Right? Third, the conditions actually placed are either give us peace or we'll recognise Palestine, which means if we get peace, you're not going to recognise Palestine. How does that logic and that morality work? Now, the reality is that the conditions are such, the conditions that they said are such, that everybody knows, and even ministers themselves have admitted, Israel will never meet, including, by the way, agreeing to a two-state solution, which the Israeli Knesset has voted against. The Israeli cabinet are wide-scale against, including the Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, who has publicly said they don't support the creation of a Palestinian state. So in reality, unless Keir Starmer buckles in the next month, there will be recognition of a Palestinian state in September, because the terms that are set out by Keir Starmer will not be met by Israel. But it is nonetheless insulting and offensive and immoral to suggest that the right of self-determination and self-governance of Palestinian people should be determined or comes with preconditions and prerequisites. That being said, the reality is good. And actually, if we do end up recognizing a Palestinian state, then it's something that UK governments should have done long ago. And this is what's amazing to me. And I think one of the things that's most amazing about this entire discussion is I think people are exposing themselves for being hypocrites and liars, and have been for a really long time. Because for as long as I have been alive, the safe space for people who don't actually know what they're talking about in relation to Israel and Palestine is to say two-state solution, right? So you ask anyone, pretty much the mainstream of politics in the UK and America and others, if in the last 25 years you'd ask them about Israel and Palestine, their default position would have been to revert from right to left to say, I believe in a two-state solution. A lot of these people have been lying about that, because you cannot believe in a two-state solution and believe in the recognition of one people in another to recognize one country in another.
But do you still think a two-state solution is actually a viable thing to want? It is based in a reality, or are you saying it's not?
Well, it's not based in reality as far as the Israeli side are. First of all, I mean, there's some realities on the ground, and a reason why this is happening so quickly. In order for there to be a two-state solution, a Palestine needs to exist. Israel, and for all the talk about, wiping Israel off the map, Israel is actually wiping Palestine off the map. Both its people through ethnic cleansing and genocide in Gaza and actually parts of the West Bank, and in settlements. So the 1967 borders are broadly what's agreed, roughly what the borders would look like in a two-state solution. Right. Those borders have been blown out of the water by Israel through continuous settlement, expansion, and annexation. So part of the reason this is happening now by some is suggested it's because, pretty soon there won't be a Palestine left to recognize. But it's pretty difficult to believe people are two states. First of all, you just can't say you believe in a two-state solution in which you don't recognize that Palestine should be unilaterally and immediately recognized, because that's how it works. There has been a lot of criticisms from people saying, why are the conditions on Israel and not on Hamas? Hamas is a terrorist organization. listed in the UK. We don't negotiate with Hamas. We don't set conditions upon Hamas. We sometimes publicly demand Hamas do things like release the hostages, but there are no discussions or negotiations that we have with Hamas. Whereas the Israeli government and the state of Israel, we sell arms to, we do trade with, we have historically called an ally, and so of course we have conditions placed on them. Now I'm saying contradictory things because in my view it's actually quite offensive to put preconditions on a Palestinian state, and that right should be, again, inalienable. But the discussions and the narratives that this is somehow rewarding Hamas, or that the conditions should be placed on Hamas, also don't make any sense.
So, interestingly, Canada has joined in saying that it will also recognise Palestine's authority, but it has said that it needs commitments by the Palestinian Authority president to fundamentally reform its governance, to hold elections in 2026 in which Hamas can play no part, and to demilitarise the Palestinian state, and to release the hostages.
By the way, the other thing as well that people conveniently ignore, Hamas themselves. Now, I said this on Trevor Phillips' show either yesterday or the day before. Yesterday. And he came back to me with, are you going to trust what Hamas say? My view is whatever group says something, if it's, call their bluff, if that's the case. Hamas themselves have said that on creation of a Palestinian state, they would disarm and disband. They themselves have said it. Right?
I find it really... So the argument...
By the way, it's not just kind of that. Germany has also said they're looking into it. France have obviously called for it.
So the deployment of the anti... argument is that you're rewarding Hamas for maintaining the hostages, right?
Yeah, that's what is being said. Yeah.
Yes. So how would you respond to that?
It has nothing to do. I mean,
they're separate. They're totally separate.
The recognition of Palestine is the right of Palestinian people. If you believe in a two-state solution, that should happen anyway. Now, what Keir Starmer is saying, I disagree, but this is his argument, is they're doing this to maximum effect. So they're trying to have a tangible difference on the ground. Because ultimately, even if they immediately and unilaterally recognize Palestine today on the 1967 borders, the actual crisis ahead of us, the man-made atrocity ahead of us, is the starvation of Palestinian children and Palestinian civilians. It's 60,000 people having been killed since in the last 2 years. It's the war crimes that have been committed in Gaza. So what I guess Keir Starmer's argument would be is that they're actually timing the recognition now to have maximum effect so that it may have some diplomatic efforts in pushing Israel to stop what it's doing in Gaza. It's not going to, but that's what they will say. So it's not about in any way, shape or form rewarding Hamas or feeding into Hamas's narratives. And by the way, I don't even think, unless you don't believe in a two-state solution, I don't see how that...
I also want to ask you what actually it means to be recognised formally as a state in terms of diplomacy, right?
Yeah.
So if the UK does, and all these other nations, Europe, Germany, France, recognise Palestine as a sovereign state and no longer just a territory, what does that mean for the people of Palestine? Does it mean they now have access to more diplomacy? Does that mean they have access to the UN? Does that mean they will be subject to treaty? What does it actually mean? And does it get us any closer to ending the conflict?
So there are some legal ramifications, certainly in the UK once they go recognised as a state. Not least, I think the Palestinian mission here would be officially a consulate, and I think would come under diplomatic laws and diplomatic protections. I think that's the case. There would also be legal implications in terms of international law once they're recognised as a state, although the UN has recognised them as a state for a while, an observer, not a state at the UN for a while. But look, it's true to say that it's largely symbolic. Not entirely, but largely symbolic. Doesn't make it wrong. But what should also be said is, in the current crisis that we're in, the actual priority, and I guess why a lot of people have pivoted to say, okay, good. I mean, not good in terms of it's got preconditions and that's wrong, but if it does end up in the result of Palestine being recognized, we should have done that a long time ago. But the reality is, where are sanctions against the Israeli economy, military infrastructure, the Israeli cabinet, those who've committed war crimes. Why aren't we holding them account, the people who are committing these war crimes? So, for example, the Middle East Eye reported that a major general in the Israeli Air Force landed in the UK for a conference with the Royal Air Force, someone who had overseen airstrikes allegedly in Gaza. It was confirmed by a minister through a parliamentary question that we had at that point, were continuing to train Israeli forces on UK soil. So these are things that we can tangibly do, or all the way to things like, a complete weapons embargo and a weapons ban, which we've only seen a partial one so far. So it is largely symbolic, and there's so much that we could do, but we should also bear in mind that the cloud over all of this is the live starvation of Gaza, which Amnesty International, for one, have said that starvation is being used as a weapon of war. So, we've got children. I think last I checked, in the last sort of 3 or 4 days, something like 130, or I think overall 133 people had died as a result of malnutrition and starvation in Gaza, of which I want to say 80 were children. The reports coming out, 1 in 5 children that have been screened have come in with malnutrition. 39% of all civilians in Gaza, and that's 2.1 million people, will go days without eating now, according to reports. So we are facing a humanitarian situation unlike any we've seen in the past. And when I was growing up, when we did history lessons, and I was a history buff, I don't. Did you study history at school? We always used to have the conversation of what would we have done in the periods of history that we study of great tragedies, things like the Rwandan crisis, which we weren't old enough or weren't born to have influence over, all the way to Srebrenica. A lot of people go back to World War II as well. What would we have done? And we, at the time, I remember thinking, society is better than that now. What this last period has shown us is society is worse, because those people didn't have a live stream into children starving, children being bombed, hospitals being bombed, schools being leveled, 90% of all infrastructure in Gaza being leveled, and it being live streamed on a device on my phone as I watched it. And all of us and all of these governments have done nothing.
Indeed. I'm sure we'll be coming back to this story as the weeks come on, and we're all hoping that there will be some kind of solution as we keep all eyes on Gaza. But for now, Ali, thank you for taking us through that. I think that's really, really important. Coming up after the break, we're going to talk about Nigel Farage's new crime blitz. The Reform UK leader has pledged to spend over $17 billion to halve crime in the UK. If it was so easy, why didn't someone else think of it? Well, we'll be discussing whether there's actually any legs to Nigel Farage's promise after the break.
Welcome back. You're listening to Politics Uncensored with me, Ali Milani.
And me, Zoe Grunewald. Now, Nigel Farage has pledged to spend over $17 billion to halve crime in the UK if Reform UK wins the next election. He's promised new prisons, deportations of foreign criminals, and recruiting tougher police officers. His plans include scrapping HS2 and net zero policies to fund the measures, which also involve pop-up custody centres and outsourcing prison places abroad, such as to places like El Salvador. Can this tough-on-crime approach restore public confidence, or will it deepen social divides and face practical challenges? OK, Ali, I have a few opinions on this.
Can I ask you a question before we start? I don't know if we've talked about this before, but I imagine the room in which that sending criminals, outsourcing prisons abroad or sending criminals abroad, I imagine it looked something like this. Zia Yusuf, Nigel Farage, and maybe some of their cronies in a room. And they said, you know what we should do? We should outsource. We should send these foreign criminals, particularly, we should send them abroad, right? Where should we send them? And someone went, well, they did say Rwanda. And they went, oh, can't go back to that because we criticised it at the time. All right, let's list countries we think are worse than Rwanda. And they just went through different, and they landed on El Salvador.
You do know where the blueprint comes from, don't you?
No.
This is what Donald Trump is doing.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
To El Salvador. Oh, of course, that's where he sent the
alleged I don't even think there was that much brain power in. They just went, what's Donald Trump doing? Why don't we do that?
Sorry, I interrupted.
No, it's okay. So, Brits hate crime, right? They obviously want to see it halved. That was also Labour's general election pledge, right? Nigel Farage declared that crime has become commonplace across Britain, and he's accused ministers of prioritising everything except keeping the people of this country safe. Of course, he started blaming immigration. He said there was an alarming parallel between the extraordinary rise in the number of reported rapes and the wholly irresponsible immigration and asylum policies pursued by the first Labour and then Conservative governments. We know that Farage and his allies have also been repeating this claim that foreign nationals account for 25% of sexual offences in the UK, which is a statistic that's been widely challenged, not because its source is questionable, but it has a lack of context, right? You can't just pull figures out like this. Also, even if it were true, I wonder who commits the other 75% of sexual offences in the UK. Could it be white British men? And why are you only selectively outraged about that 25%?
Yeah, when it comes to a crime of that severity, I mean, all crime really, but a crime of that severity, why does it matter? Well, surely you just want crime dealt with.
Do you know who I think the common perpetrator is? Probably men. But if you only are interested in sex crimes committed by foreign nationals, and you don't really care that much about sex crimes committed by white British men, there is a word for that. It's white supremacy. Sorry, 2 words, white supremacy.
Yeah.
And misogyny, because you're basically saying, I'm going to turn a blind eye when white men do it.
It's such a strange, like, it's not strange because we know, we can guess or we have opinions on the reasons behind why that may be. But it's so strange to then just ignore 75% of that crime being committed.
It's very politically calculated. The other thing is there were some things that Farage said in his speech that just weren't true. So he said that, crime is rising. But actually, since the 1990s, overall crime has fallen significantly. So offences like theft, criminal damage and non-fatal violence are all down. Yes, sexual offences have risen in recent years, but the picture is way more complex than Nigel Farage was making it out to be. Meanwhile, I think people should have a look at Reform UK's own ranks if they want to see how serious this party is about fighting crime. Of the 5 MPs Reform returned from the general election, 1, which was your best mate Rupert Lowe, was obviously investigated for alleged violent behaviour before he was booted out of the party. He denies wrongdoing, was not charged, we should mention that. But he's still not back in the party, right? The other, James McMurdoch, has a conviction for a violent assault against his former girlfriend. He just so happens to no longer be in the party too, but not because of that. That was fine. That was already known about. No, he's no longer in the party because he's alleged to have borrowed tens of thousands of pounds in COVID loans. So that's a 20% rate of Reform MPs with violent offences against women and 40% kicked out of the party for alleged misconduct.
So can I ask...
Of the original intake. So it's not really a party I think is going to crack down on thuggery. What do you think?
Yeah, so if Nigel Farage or others want to extrapolate the number of migrants being disproportionate in any crime, should we not extrapolate on Reform UK members
That's what I'm thinking.
Disproportionate likelihood of them being criminals or alleged criminals?
Would I rather be trapped in a room with a Reform MP or a foreign national?
Well, statistically speaking,
I'd probably rather be trapped in a room with a foreign national.
Can I also ask, if this fella is so tough on crime and is so tough on wanting to put criminals behind bars and make our streets safer, I seem to remember an instance of thugs covering their face for the large parts, smashing up police vehicles, putting police members in the hospital, rioting, trespassing on hotels. Do you remember? I think Epping was one. And Nigel Farage's response, very strange for someone who's tough on crime, because I seem to remember he says he just understands the anger that exists in these communities. And he warned the political class that we're looking at wide scale, did he use the term civil disobedience?
Civil disobedience on a vast scale. And he said, do I understand how people in Epping feel? You bet your life I do. I don't think he made similar statements when Kyle Clifford murdered Louise Hunt and her mother and her sister, or when Wayne Couzens abducted Sarah Everard. But I could be mistaken.
So what? Let's brainstorm here. Forget just me, you, and our lovely producer. So he seems to really care about some crime, particularly that 25% that you spoke about, but doesn't really have the same sort of rhetoric for what happened in Epping, didn't have the same rhetoric in the case that you just mentioned. Certainly doesn't have the same rhetoric with members of his own party. What was it? 2 out of 5? So
Yeah.
What do we think is going on, and what's the root cause?
Well, I mean, you have to judge a man by the company he keeps.
Yes.
Famously, good friends with Donald Trump.
Yes.
Who was found civilly liable for sexual abuse in a US court.
Yes, first president to be elected.
He praised Andrew Tate as an important voice for young men. And in a previous life, as we know, Farage, although he might pretend to be a man of the people, was a city trader. I would say that they don't have the highest tolerance for morals.
Are we saying...
So I don't know. A little bit sceptical of Reform UK's crime blitz.
Are you suggesting that he's not being entirely honest in his wanting to tackle crime?
No.
Are we suggesting that there might be alternative motives behind some of these political statements?
I would also question the idea that you can pay for all of this. It's just a matter of pay for it by scrapping net zero. And
he pays for everything by scrapping net zero. Yeah. Right? I wish I had a magic money tree like that, because I just announce policy after policy scrapping net zero. But everything seems to be about scrapping. I mean, in this case, it's HS2 as well, but scrapping net zero. It is ironic to me, of all people and all parties, Nigel Farage going on the offensive on crime specifically, given his own party, given his own language and rhetoric and tone when it pertains to Epping. Do you think people are going to buy it? I mean, they're like 7 points ahead in the polls.
I mean, I think Brits care about crime. Brits like, they want tough on law and order. They want people to be tough on law and order.
But it seems like that tough on law and order is just escalating. So it went from like put them in prison, round them up, to send them to Rwanda, to screw it, like send them to El Salvador.
But it's this easy answer that Nigel Farage can give compared to Labour, because he doesn't actually have to run a government. He can just say things, which is that basically, if we didn't have any foreign nationals, we wouldn't have any crime. Yeah. Just like if we didn't have any foreign nationals, there'd be housing for everyone. There would be no NHS waiting list. Yeah. It's an easy answer. It's obviously completely wrong, because as we just pointed out, even just on sexual offences, even if we believe that statistic that hasn't been double verified, you'd still have 75% of sexual offences still taking place.
Yeah, it also does what traditionally works really well in politics, and it stokes fear, because people are afraid. Yeah. Particularly, they have this like thing that London is this lawless like city, and look, there is a crime issue in London, but is it a lawless city? No, and so I think perpetuating that helps. I do have a question for you, because he did the press conference and he announced all these measures, and other than what you have just said, and for a party that's leading in the polls, he's most likely, whether it's bookies or the polls saying he's most likely to be next prime minister, I haven't seen the media really dissect what he's saying, the proposals he's making, and have any level of serious accountability for a party in a government and a potential prime minister who may be the leader of the country. They've just it's kind of like what Fox News did with Donald Trump. Yeah,
and I think also the sums just don't add up, right? So Nigel Farage was on LBC this morning with Nick Ferrari, and a brilliant caller rang in and pointed out that he's going to pay for everything by scrapping net zero and DEI and HS2. But the things he wants to introduce are, many times the amount of efficiencies he thinks he's going to save. So where's the money coming from? And his source, literally, people can go and look up this clip, you'll find it was from this morning, obviously, is just, trust me, bro. Yeah. He's literally just like, it adds up, don't worry about it. Well, it doesn't add up, and I would Well, new prisons are billions of pounds. Deportation of foreign criminals, I think the deportation of each individual person, whether they're criminals or not, is minimum £10,000 per person, if not £100,000. And to be able to do that, obviously, there's going to be
legal challenges. Recruiting more police officers, that's billions of pounds again. If I remember correct, in 2019, when I was standing on our manifesto, it was £10 billion.
Ali, what's also going to cost us billions of pounds when we don't have any immigration anymore? We have no health and social care workers.
The therapy I'm going to need when this man's prime minister, that's going to cost billions of pounds.
I'm hoping that the scrutiny will really start to ramp up.
But there's no suggestion that it will happen. Because he seems to be able... First of all, as the party who's leading in the polls, he seems to get away with not saying much, highlighting problems, not giving solutions, or giving very vague solutions.
So, for example, he's been very, very critical of the Online Safety Act, saying that Reform UK would repeal it if they came into office, which again, oh great, let's make children even more vulnerable to all these things going on.
But no suggestion of what they'd replace it with.
No suggestion. He doesn't, and he says, I don't know what I'd replace it with. There must be a tech solution.
Yeah.
Okay, so you're going to get those tech bros who you actually believe should be able to do whatever you want, because fundamentally in your heart you're a Thatcherite libertarian, even though you pretend to be this like
or he'll be on the phone to
going down the populist. But he thinks that tech companies are going to come up with some solution to limit the reach of their technology.
You've kind of said it, but let's just say it explicitly. This guy is an ex-city trader, real in his heart, probably a Thatcherite libertarian. He's an absolute fraud. Yeah. He's not this like
man of the people.
Like you said, down the pub populist. He's a traditional sort of pretty right wing. Ex-banker using some of these right-wing views on immigration, in my view, for political purposes, but he isn't this like radical that's come from outside the system, this anti-stuff. He's as establishment as it gets.
He's been doing it for years and years and years, and he's finally found a way in. This is a new hat he's wearing. He's gone from die-hard Thatcherite banker to Brexit big man to pub populist, and now he is the shining armour, law and order saviour.
Should I depress you though? The polls, that lead gets bigger and bigger.
But is that because Keir Starmer gets worse and worse?
Possibly, yeah. But once it comes down to the actual at the ballot, that's what I mean. I'm actually shitting it that we're headed like Labour is setting the path for a reform government, but these guys could be in Parliament, and one of the scariest parts about reform is what happens after Nigel Farage, because Nigel Farage is probably the least extreme.
Well, as we were kind of saying, Nigel Farage's heart isn't actually really in mass deportations.
He's a right-wing conservative, right? Who, by the way, by his own admission, his sort of lifelong goal seems to have become destroying the Conservative Party.
Yeah, he wants power and he wants money, and he'll say what he needs to get there because he's shameless. The problem is there are genuinely people within his ranks who
are scary
people, far right people.
Yeah.
It's a kind of like Trump and JD Vance in a way.
It's
like, be careful what you wish for, because worse than Trump could be JD Vance as president of the United States.
Can you foresee anything knocking them off course?
Nigel Farage himself will either win it or lose it. It's all Farage's project. And just as he is a very good communicator and campaigner, he rubs people up terribly the wrong way, and he has a lot of new ambitious egos who might believe in this stuff more than he does. Want to go and this is the key thing, want to go further on it. I think the thing that could blow reform up is if he has somebody like Rupert Lowe who gets very, very hyped up, believes this stuff, wants to go a lot further than Reform UK is going, and whips up the members and the other MPs and who else it is behind him, and it becomes a challenge to Nigel Farage's authority, whether he can hold it together in a moment like that. Yeah,
and there has already been dissension amongst the right. I mean, some of these guys have left the party now or been kicked out of the party, but that seems to be the biggest risk for them. That's it from Politics Uncensored today. Join us next Thursday at 5 p.m. where we unwrap the week's political talking points. You can stay up to date with the show by following at Politics Uncensored UK on social media, where you can find me at Ali Milani UK.
And you can find me at Zoe Grunewald.
If you've missed any of today's show, you can listen back and catch up at FUBARradio.com or via the FUBAR Radio app.
Make sure you download it from your app store now.
Thanks for listening. See you next week for another episode of Politics Uncensored.